That's it. Well, welcome everybody. I am Ida Hajibayanis, and I'm the chair of the Center of African Studies here at SOAS. I have to apologize for the size of the room. I think we had, there's many events going on today, but also the numbers registered were a bit lower, so we thought we were going to be okay, but it seems not. But hopefully we should be fine. So the center was founded in 1965 here at SOAS. And since 1991, we've really been trying and promote and stimulate research and discussions on Africa within the university, but also in the community as well. And I notice here today, like most of you actually from the community, that students might be having their exams right now. And we're really pleased to have everybody here today. I look forward to this compelling discussion on an African people's quest for freedom and justice, a political history of Eritrea, 1941-1962, which I read that is a groundbreaking account of Eritrea's modern history under post-war international administration. Most of you know the author. Probably saying his name very, very wrong. You're welcome to correct me. Is it Alemseged? Yeah. Alemseged Tesfai, who is a lawyer and historian, born in southern Eritrea town of Adi Quala. That's said wrong, I'm sorry. He's also the country's premier playwright. His drama, The Other War, was the first Eritrean play ever published and the first to be translated into English. We're really pleased to have you here today. Thank you so much. And he'll be in conversation with Professor Richard Reid of University of Oxford, previously of SOAS. I have to probably say that a bit. And he's a historian of modern Africa with a focus on the 19th and 20th centuries. He's interested in warfare and militarism in Africa in the 19th century and 20th centuries as well, particularly East and Northeast Africa. And we're really pleased to have you here today. Thank you so much for agreeing to come. I was told it's impossible to have him, but I believe Abdu, who's organized everything, managed to bring us all together. So thank you very much, Abdu, if you're somewhere online. I am certain we will have an insightful conversation exploring themes of liberation, governance, and justice. And I look forward to being here with you guys. If anything happens like a fire alarm, we go out through there and then down the stairs, and we all meet outside. But there shouldn't be one. And thank you very much. You're welcome. Okay, kick off.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Ida. I am previously at SOAS, but I think more importantly, for the purposes of this meeting, I'm formerly of the University of Almara. Which is where I began my career. So I'm just going to say a few words. I'm not going to spend very long talking about this book. I think we need to hear from the author rather than from me. But I have to say it's an enormous privilege for me to be able to do this today. This is an extraordinary piece of scholarship, in my view, dealing with one of the most critically important, and yet strangely under-examined and least understood periods in Eritrea's history, namely the period from 1941 to 1962, which it's important to remind ourselves is the era of decolonization in most other parts of the continent. And yet this is a moment where Eritrea strives to express itself, and yet its struggle for decolonization is set back, and in fact, in many ways, is recolonized. Alemseged tells this story in very vivid terms. I mentioned that this is strangely misunderstood, this period. Other historians have examined this, the 1940s, 1950s. Most recently, perhaps Joseph Venosa and his study of Islam, and early nationalist mobilization. Rubio, of course, that many of you will know, worked as part of a larger study on the Eritrean struggle. Tegesi Nagash on the period of the Federation. Obazgi Yohannes, I guess, also wrote in terms of Eritrea as a pawn. In fact, that was the title, right? Eritrea, a pawn in world politics. But no one, I think, has achieved the level of granular detail and specificity, the scope and the scale of Alemseged's book. Many of us in the room will know the roots of this book. The roots of the current book lie in Alemseged's earlier publications in Tigrinya. My own copy of Ain Falale sits unread on my shelves, because though Alemseged gave me a copy many years ago, he didn't teach me how to read it. So there it is, gathering. But I do take it down sometimes because it's a nice thing to have. And of course, that was published in Eritrea by Hidri. And I recall a conversation with Alemseged quite a few years ago in Asmara, gently pushing him to write in English. I was checking my notes from that conversation the other day, and I'd written that he was disappointingly non-committal. I mentioned in a 2014 article that I wrote around these issues that Alemseged's, quote, mammoth work remains sadly available only in Tigrinya. So it's finally in English for those of us too stupid to read Tigrinya. The book is a tour de force. The book takes us through and is organized around the three key episodes between 1941 and 62, the British administration, a period which many of us in this room will be familiar with, but Alemseged really drills into what the British period meant for the future of Eritrea, both in terms of infrastructure, i.e. the stealing of the infrastructure, and the opening up of a political space, and then the shutting down of that political space. The second section deals with the Federation itself. And we know that there are various, again, experiments in political organization, various aspirations about what the Federation might mean to different groups. And of course, there's the erosion of the Federation, the stripping away of the supposed constitutional rights that had been granted to Eritrea as an autonomous unit within the Ethiopian Empire, and the beginnings of the nationalist revolution. It's very easy, I think, those of us who have studied Eritrea for a long time, not as long as Alemseged, but have studied it, will be aware that this is a period which sometimes is given to caricatures and sort of almost cartoonish kind of heroes and villains, people who were unionist, people who were kind of nationalist heroes. In Alemseged's book, we encounter an array of characters on various sides of the political debates of the time. They are not heroes and villains. They are fully dimensional human beings. They are people who Alemseged has filled out in terms of their aspirations, their dreams, their desires, their visions for the territory. They're making decisions and developing their political views in the midst of much larger pressures and personal prejudices. And again, I mentioned earlier that this is the era of decolonization. And in many ways, this thought had occurred to me probably as a result of a conversation with Alemseged 20-something years, 1,000 years ago, where it struck me that Eritreans were being asked questions before most other African nationalist movements, and having to come to decisions and having to decide what it was that they were, and what the future of the territory was. And this was happening in the second half of the 1940s, which was actually much earlier than most of sub-Saharan Africa. In the book, we encountered the betrayals, the misjudgments, and the mishandlings on the part of external actors, including, of course, the UK and famously the US. It's a period of missed opportunities, I think. This is a period in which I think we can see as being absolutely formative. Hopes for independence are crushed, but these years, I think, see the crystallization of the nationalist imagination. And that's something that I hope Alemseged will have something to say about in a few moments. It's the period which sees a very rich political culture growing. There is great debate. There's a great deal of division. But there is debate. There are political parties that split. Certain groups come together. This is an era of extraordinary political vibrancy, as well as one of division. Crucially, of course, Eritrea and Eritreans are underestimated, and not for the last time. We can debate endlessly, and Alemseged touches on this in the book. When our nation's born, there is a very large and some might say quite tedious scholarship on when nations actually come into existence in the imagination. People like Benedict Anderson, Eric Hobsbawm, and you reference these, Alemseged, at the early part of the book. But there is no doubt that the critical formative elements in the formation of Eritrean nationalism are here in this period, in the 1940s, 1950s, in the trauma and the turbulence of this era. I have to emphasize, however, that this is no dry political history. Those of you who know Alemseged's work previously know that he is incapable of writing dry political history. Some of us are very good at it, but you are not. The country comes alive in these pages. We see the socioeconomic and cultural changes rapidly unfolding across these years, changes which in many ways underpinned the growth of nationalist protests. Urban workers, students, shifting socioeconomic communities, finding new ways and increasingly potent ways of protesting and expressing themselves. Now, some of us have long made the case for this period being the focus of historical research, going back to the 40s and 50s, understanding the experiments in political activism and organization, the role of economic upheaval and how that plays into the growth of nationalism, the rapidly evolving visions of what Eritrea was and what Eritrea can become. This period, simply put, is critical to understanding the country's long past. Alemseged has more than delivered. And in very large part, this is because of the extraordinary depth of research, which I think, I don't know any work in recent times that has this level of depth that underpins the book. It's seriously impressive. A rich body of archival material, as well as newspapers and what we call vernacular grey literature, so that the material that often disappears from archives, but the pamphlets, the speeches, so forth. And it's worth noting, of course, that Alemseged's access to material in Tigrinya, which is denied to most Ferengi historians, is hugely important. And I'd draw attention particularly to the interviews. They deserve special mention. These are a real gift to future historians, because we know, unfortunately, it's a simple fact of biology, that the generation involved in these events is disappearing. And within this book, we have interviews with key actors and Alemseged's remarkable ability to glean insights from those characters. And I would draw attention just to one, and that's the interview with Asfahab Walder-Mikel, which is remarkable, really. And Alemseged reproduces a summary, actually in quite a lot of detail, that interview, which will serve historians of the future, because of course no one can. I think that was 1996. Yeah. Now I don't want to say too much more because I think we want to hear from the author. But I'd like to end my comments on just a personal note, if I may. My view is that this book is the crowning achievement of a body of work which will be known to all of you in this room, well known and rightly celebrated. For those of us, again, we don't read Tigrinya. His 2 weeks in the trenches, published by Red Sea Press, just blew me away when I first read it. Not simply in terms of the literary content, rich in language, observation, frequently deeply moving, the range of forms of expression testament to the author's talent, but also, as is well known, the culture of the armed struggle didn't generally facilitate personal reflection, subjective experience, the first-hand accounts. This was not something that that those involved in the armed struggle generally celebrated. But here was someone who broke the mold and whose emotional, personal approach enriched our understanding of the struggle immeasurably. So for me, to get to know Alemseged personally was an enormous privilege. And in the early 2000s, or certainly sometime early in the millennium, he gave his time freely to me, as I know he did to many other scholars and journalists who were interested in the history of the country. And in the process, he offered me a world-class education. And I don't think I've ever properly thanked you, Alemseged, so I'm thanking you now. But I think more importantly, on behalf of everyone gathered here, and we will hear more from Alemseged in a moment, I think we offer him a massive yahanyaling for writing this book. So I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. And Alemseged.
How do you do that? There's no way you can scroll down a bit.
Okay.
Maybe just come to the front as well. I mean,
Okay. You need to be less popular, Alemseged. It's terrible.
I know you're very popular.
First question from me, and reading this book, Alemseged, I'm very struck by the idea of the nation, and going back to the idea of Anderson and Hobsbawm and so forth. The process by which it's created in the popular imagination. Where do you sit on this issue when we think about the 1940s, 1950s? Would you agree that this is the period in which an Eritrean nationhood comes into existence?
First of all, thank you for that uplifting review of my book and myself. I think I've added some more years to my life tonight. But it's a little longer. I mean, the question of when a nation is born is extremely it's difficult to pinpoint.
Now there is innovation.
You don't know? It's difficult to really pinpoint. It's a process. It's a process Eritrea became a colonial unit when the Italians so created it in 1890. But the Italians were not occupying a void. They were occupying an area which is peaceful, but culture and history and relationships over the years before the colonial period. And so the relationships of the people who made up Eritrea before colonialism matters a lot. Because if nationalism is a state of mind of a people, then that state of mind is built through the interrelationships of people over the ages. So I think we can look back also. I'm not saying the nation was created before colonialism, because Eritrea as a nation, as a unit, was set up by the Italians. But the people who populated Eritrea, the people who populated who have relationships. The one thing that strikes me always, that when in the late 1880s, the Italians appeared in occupied Massawa. The people who now constitute Eritrea submitted to Italy. Why did they do that? It's a very, very important question that's not looked into in existing literature. They did so because that territory was a tributary territory to the power centers of the whole of Africa in that area, including SOAS, Uganda, Tigray, and all these places. And whenever the people of the present day Eritrea refused to pay the tributes that were always demanded by these people, they were always invaded. So the series of invasions, especially from the 1780s, when the so-called area, what's it called? The era,
the many massacres.
the many massacres. From that period until the arrival of Aluda, there were consistent invasions by all the people who came before, after Sokolnika and before Aluda himself. So there was this suffering by these people, a common suffering, that we don't give up. So these people were being lashed by the same whip, or less, suffering the same pain. And therefore they submitted to it. When they submitted to it, they immediately took over. And the Italians started to think that they had occupied a void, and therefore they could act as many foreigners did. They could do whatever they wanted in Eritrea. So they started to rebel. That rebellion was crushed because there was an agreement between the Emperor Menelik of Ethiopia and the Italians, Ferdinand Martin. So whenever there was a rebellion on the border between Eritrea and Ethiopia, by the time Eritrea had become a nation, had become a colony, then all those rebellions were crushed by the Ethiopians themselves, with the knowledge of Menelik. Now that created a space for the Eritrea, and there I think that started this consciousness. This particular point is not examined properly, in my opinion, in all the literature that exists. So during the Italian period, people who, for similar reasons, submitted to Italy were put together and started a relationship within a colonial system like all other colonies in Africa. Eritrean nationalism started to grow within Italy. Because it started to manifest itself after the defeat of Italy in 1941, because people like Abdul Kabir and Ibrahim Sultan and all these people who immediately started to demand independent from Italy, or not, at least independence in general, these people were born off the Italian experience. So I think within the Italian experience, there were some beginnings of nationalism.
I mean, you mentioned Ibrahim Sultan, for example, there. It seems to me that one of the most interesting features of the early part of this period is that relationship between Islam and social reformism. Is it fair to say that one of the headwaters, as it were, of Eritrean nationalism, and certainly nationalist protest, is that relationship between the western and northern, the western lowlands, the northern highlands, that relationship between Islam and social and desire for social reform.
You mean the penal system?
Yes.
Well, I mean, as far as the beginnings of the Muslim League is concerned,
yes,
the roots of that movement was based in the uprising of the serfs or the tenants against the feudal lords of Sahel and the Western provinces.
Yeah.
That's the roots of the movement. Ibrahim Sultan became the leader of that particular serf movement, the social movement, which then transited to the Muslim League and a political movement for the Muslim League. And he became also the leader of the Muslim League. He established the Muslim League based on his support from the former serf school, had by 1947-48 been freed from their previous status.
In addition to that, this is a period of really major socioeconomic change, and one of the features of Africa more broadly in this period is our economic pressures, particularly after World War II. And Eritrea seems to experience those economic pressures particularly acutely. I'm thinking in particular the growth of the labor movement, for example, culminating in the 1958 general strike. How do you see the significance of those economic changes specifically in terms of driving a disillusionment with the federation with Ethiopia, but also a sense of Eritreans?
Yeah, well, the economic changes that came about, especially from the 1930s on, when Italy started to build its economy in Eritrea, also because it wanted to invade Ethiopia.
Yeah.
So it brought in many Italians, not only for settlement, but also Italian artisans and soldiers and whatnot. And there was this rise in industrial structure of the country, infrastructure of the country. And with it came workers. And by 1949, the workers were starting to get that's fair, with the way they were in 1949. The first labor strike against the British came in 1949. Before that, there had been some dissatisfaction, not only within the labor movement, but also attached to the political movement. So in 1945-49 was the defining moment as far as the labor movement was concerned, because that was when the railway strike took place. And then from then onwards, a couple of years later, some of the workers established the Eritrean labor movement, which was one of the first such movements, I believe, in Africa itself. In 1951, they established it. Then it went on until 1953. But by 1953, the federation was coming in, and Ethiopia would not tolerate a labor movement because there was no labor movement in Ethiopia itself. And there was an assassination attempt on the president of the labor movement, Abu Damarian, and that disbanded. And then the 1958 strike that you mentioned was a revival of the 1951 movement after so many years.
So at the same time as you've got increasingly kind of urban organization in this period, people establishing kind of economic sense of economic community. But this is also a period of shifter violence, particularly obviously in rural areas. What role do you think does that shifter violence play in this period as a backdrop to political developments in the times?
A major role. The shifter movement, when you look at the shifter individual, they have their own individual reasons for rebelling. Some of them because their fathers have been killed by somebody, some of them because a chief that they supported had been removed either by the Italians or the British, and so on. But once they became shifter and they started to move in violence, I think it was in 1948, the shifters themselves started to feel bad about the way they were treating the people. So at a place called Robert, they were having a meeting. Now, in that meeting, they raised the issue of how they have been treating their own people. They were becoming, the struggle, robbers and thieves and so on. They didn't like that. So they said, how do we improve this? So they were against the British. Now, the Ethiopian school, who were being represented in Asmara by former started to infiltrate the shifter movement and turn it into a movement for the union of Ethiopia. So from 1948 onwards, they become unionists. I mean shifters or union of Ethiopia. Now, in every meeting that the Commission of Inquiry, the four Red Cross and the United Nations General Assembly, in every meeting that was held, the shifters came and expanded the independence. And therefore, the committees, both of them, both the Full Power and the UN committees, could not have an estimate of how strong or weak the independence movement was. And the leaders many leaders were shot. Political History is one of them. Urban terrorism was also. Adi Quala, old man, 85 years old, but leader of the Muslim was also assassinated. Semaru was another in the Syria region, he was also assassinated. And basically, all very important polemicists for the independence movement. As much Brad was assassinated by those staying in his house, some of his family. And from that kind of a pressure, the independence movement could not really make its mark on the committees, and therefore, the result of the inquiry could not in any way reflect the wishes of the independent side of it.
I've got so many questions, but I just have two more if you bear with me, and then I'll open up to Q&A. One is the interviews that you did that I mentioned earlier, considering the sensitivity of the subject matter, and as I mentioned, this period is often kind of can be very framed in very polemical terms. How did you approach those interviews? Did you have to? I mean, what did you prepare yourself mentally to go and interview Asfaha, for example, or did you want to see just what he had to say as an old man at that point, reflecting back on his life and so forth?
Well, in our country, interviews are extremely difficult because people are not willing to talk about issues that might somehow touch on the sensitivities of others, or perhaps maybe some of the people that they have to talk about or that I ask them to talk about would be their friends, former friends, and they would think they would be betraying their trust.
Yeah.
Things like that, Mood the recession. Mood the recession in Trina means you don't accuse that. You don't accuse the dead.
It's an Irish thing as well.
Okay. But I found that many of them were extremely honest.
Yeah.
And to the point. People like the very much, one of the best interviews I had was they just much, they were hands in Somalia. An old man, 90 years old, bedridden, but very honest. He didn't hide anything from what he did before and what he thought later. The judgment for their hands is the same kind of person. As for the Mikael, whom I have quoted in the tape, was also bedridden. He died a year after I interviewed him.
Yeah.
I had nothing to do with it.
You're a man with pressure and shock.
But he was also honest. So I mean, their honesty and their point of view at the time influenced the way I wrote that book. Because history is best told if the conditions under which it took place is taken into consideration. I mean, why did they think that way? And why did Ashraf become an annexationist? He believed that Ethiopia was the best solution for Eritrea, and he fought for it. I respect that. And in the book also, I respect it.
Yeah.
I don't agree with it, of course. I fought for Eritrea's independence as a result of what these people did. I spent many years of my life fighting in the bushes, but these are people who, I mean, history is not what you want, what you choose.
Yes.
Would have happened.
Yeah.
History is what happened. So you own it.
Yeah.
You can. I was talking about this at a conference last time. I was saying history is not only the good; it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. I mean, so if there is ugly things there, then right. Bad things there, right. It's a question of how do you correct the bad, how do you rectify the ugly, how do you embellish the good. I mean, that's that's for future generations. But when history takes place at a certain period of time within certain limitations, then that was how people thought. Both the independence movement and so we take them as they were.
Yeah.
The duty of the historian should be to tell the story as it happened. If you start to see history from the perspective, from the prism of the present, then you go wrong. That's
I mean, it is, for those of you who haven't managed to read the book yet, I mean, I think it is one of the most terrific things methodologically is the way that sensitively and openly you approach those interviews, and you've managed to get a lot of information as a result. So my final, before we open it up to questions, and it's kind of related to that, Alemseged. What often, sometimes I think about this particular period is that it's a generational shift. And I'm very conscious that you were born in 1944. You kind of come of age in this period in a way. I mean, you're 18 years old when the Federation is abolished. So you're kind of living through this, and I suppose it's a double-headed question. One is, would you characterize this as a period of generational shift? where a younger generation of student radicals are getting really angry about the politics of their parents. And how do you reflect personally as an objective scholar of this period on that transition?
Well, I mean, my generation of Eritreans grew up with the realization, with the notion that the federation itself had been unfair.
Yeah.
That the federation had not responded to the will and the desire of the people of Eritrea. So the fight for independence was against the federation.
Yeah.
Because there is a misconception in present literature throughout that the Eritrean liberation struggle, armed struggle for liberation, began because Eritreans were disappointed with the way Ethiopia handled the federation. That's not true. The independence movement was against federation to begin with. It was the federation that was fighting. I mean, I have a quotation from Ibrahim Sultan in the end that I don't know if I have time. Can I read? Can I read that? Yes, I would like to read.
Do you just carry this quote around with you in your inside?
I was.
Because it's all for the opportunities.
It's a very important thing for a lot of people to understand that the independence movement in Eritrea was not because the federation was abrogated by Haile Selassie. No, it was because the United Nations had decided on the federation against the will of the Eritrean people.
Yeah.
There was a section of the people of Eritrea, of the political movement in Eritrea, that perhaps joined the independent movement because it was disappointed with the way the federation was handled. And that is the unionist part.
Yeah.
That's not the majority. It was not the majority. It was substantial. It was big. It was the best organized movement because it was the best organized. And everything, it was because it was the best organized movement. It almost won the day because the decision to federate came because of the force of the argument that it presented.
Yes.
To the exclusion of the independence movement, but the independence movement stayed. Just stayed again, found birth throughout the 1980s and the 1950s until 1953-54 through the High Eritrea. I don't think you remember that the High Eritrea, a newspaper through the High Eritrea, the independence movement fought against federation, fought against, and then it was all freedom of expression, etc., etc. It was completely silenced. Yeah. And then people went underground. Okay, Haraka, the Eritrean liberation struggle started long before the obligation of the federation. So, if I'm answering your question correctly, I think it was not only a generational change, it was a continuation of what people like Ibrahim Sultan were doing. It was a continuation. Ibrahim Sultan, and so on became icons of the liberation struggle. Throughout the 1950s, the mere mention of Waldemariam would put you in jail. The mere mention, you couldn't say Waldemariam on the streets. His broadcasts from Cairo, what the Italian writer calls appuntamento con Volta, appointment with Volta. Every street in Asmara would be deserted. Everyone would go to wherever, whoever had a radio. Shut all the shutters, shut the door. We had a radio. My brother had a radio. All my neighbors would come. Kids would be kicked out, and then everyone would sit down and listen to whoever speaking from. So that's how the independence movement, independence spirit was kept alive. And I think comes from the
Yes, it certainly does. I'm going to shut up now.
No. For the next part of the conversation,
Yes.
we found a room. We found a bigger room. Do you want to move there?
Yes.
Yes. Is that okay?
Yeah. Are
Um,
you going to chair the next section?
So my colleague Megan is in the corridor. She can lead you there. It's the Wallstone Theatre, and it's going to be in the next building on the first floor. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being patient with us. A room has been freed, and now everybody is seated. I will let Professor Richard Reid continue with the conversation. And yeah, sorry once again for the confusion and everything else. You can have some wine later, so it should be all right. Thank you.
The wine stays here with me. Anyway, no more conversation from me. I'm going to now open it up and just take questions from you to Alemseged. So who would like to go first? And I'm conscious of time. Some of us need to kind of get away by 6 or shortly after 6. So we've got 25, 30 minutes. Questions, please. Yes, we've got one over here.
One question. It was in response to your first question on relationship. And you were talking about a colonial time relationship. And the Ethiopian context, which Eritrea were you talking about?
So I think if you can try and speak up, because we haven't got the mics for here, just shout. You're at the market. Which Eritrea were you talking about?
What colony?
In the pre-colonial period.
In the pre-colonial period.
When you were talking about the pre-colonial relationship among the people, and you also said there were a variety of invasions from Ethiopia, which is true, covered much of Eritrea. Which Eritrea were you talking about particularly?
I was not talking about Eritrea. I was talking about the people who constitute the Eritrea of today are the people who submitted to Italy. The Tigrans didn't submit to Italy. Gondar didn't submit to Italy. Wollo didn't submit to Italy. But every chief and the people themselves, a lot of the people constituting Eritrea today, submitted to Italy. Dankalia.
In Dankalia, it's only 5-7 days. And I think all leaders tried to submit. Dankalia, شو عتب عالتي حسب كلهم submitted within 7 days. You are right.
Thank you. No, I stressed that point because nobody really takes note of it. Why did the people who constitute Eritrea today submit to Italy? Others didn't. Why didn't the Tigrans submit to Italy? They were on the giving side. No. Because this was a periphery. Today's Eritrea, in those days, Nur al-Milash and the territories abounding it, were tributary states. They were not part and parcel of an Ethiopia, a composite Ethiopia that we are told existed for thousands of years. There were kingdoms in Ethiopia, definitely. The power, the political power, military power in that region was based in today's Ethiopia, yes. Were there relationships between Ethiopia and Eritrea? Yes, there were relationships. What kind of relationships were they? Why didn't those relationships proceed to nationhood? Why did we separate? Why did the Eritreans of today separate from the Ethiopia of today? This is a question. And the answer is in the history of what happened. The various invasions that took place. From Suhul Mikael to Alula, a period of about 120, 130 years, there were at least 8 or 9 major invasions to assure that tributes were paid by the present-day Eritrea in those days. I mean, that there was no Eritrea at the time. I don't want to be misunderstood here. Whenever people in Marab Milash, Midr whatever you want to call it, refused to pay taxes, they were invaded. When Alula is the only person who established some semblance of governance in today's Eritrea. But he came with 50,000 troops. And I'm not making this up. It's Hagai Eric, refer to Hagai Eric and define it there. 8,000 cavalrymen with their horses settled in Hamasin and Sarai. Can you imagine 8,000 horses partaking in the greenery of that area? And the whole thing was completely shorn of its vegetation, and as a result, the Zaman al-Kahida, which is what do we call it? The era of Kahida, treachery, hunger, drought, and people dispersed, some of them to Ethiopia, some of them to Sudan, some of them wherever. And the Italians came, when the Italians came, all these people who were the subject or the objects of all these invasions submitted to Italy. This aspect of Eritrean history is not mentioned anywhere in the literature that exists and that purports to be the history of Eritrea. That's what I meant.
Some question here?
I think I'm just building on what you just said now and probably the gap in Eritrean history. On the one hand, we have got the period of when do we see this Marab Milash being solidified as an identity? And what I heard, and from the little reading that I have, would be that time where and Haymanot fights with Mikhail Sahul, that rebellion, and therefore the fighting took place, and in the middle, therefore, the priests and others have come and separated them, hence the Marab Milash. I don't know whether you concur with that type of it, therefore, but the main question is, when does this Marab Milash as a line, is there any pre-Italian period which can suggest of that? My second point on that is also, if this is how separate as Alula coming to Eritrea, staying there, is a fact, and with that, therefore, where did those people go? Because Alula went through Matama with the able people, and the big chunk of that, I believe, has remained. Did these people go back to Tigray, or have they become part of us? And if yes, if they have stayed there, where did they fare on the unionist nationalist line?
Well, I mean, my book is, of course, centered on 1940s to 1961, but you know, I mean, it's a fascinating period in our history, and I've done some readings. A lot of people, I think, stayed in Eritrea. A lot of people stayed in Eritrea, and as a result, you know, there is no purity of. I don't believe there's a purity of race in Tigray or in Eritrea. I mean, Eritrea is because it's not only a periphery, but also because it's adjacent to the coastline. It has been open to all sorts of migrations, cross migrations, and therefore the people of Eritrea are a mixture of people. You know, when people talk about Eritreans being also Tigrayans, I don't understand it. I mean, is there a purity of a pure? I don't even believe that there is pure Tigrayans. You know, because as Tigrayans go towards Raya, they mix with the warlock. You know, and when you go towards Karen becomes a mixture of all sorts of languages and ethnic groups and religions even. So I mean, I think this is the subject for anthropologists and what have you. But my area of interest, as you know, is the 1940s to 1960s. So.
Thank you. Okay, we have a question at the back.
Yes.
I would say that as a non-Eritrean, I think what you're doing is amazing. I think it's important for Africans to tell their own history because a lot of the time their history has been told by others. But because their history is told by others, a lot of the time what I find is that Africans, they hold on to stories more so than the truth a lot of the time. Do you find that telling the truth, do you have a pressure to adhere to other people's stories of what the truth may be over the objective truth?
Yeah, if you want to assure objectivity, then I don't think you should only limit yourself to local or indigenous history. It's also wise to see how others see you, you know. In our case, the dominant history of Eritrea has been what the imperial Ethiopian government assigned it to be, because that's what the world heard and the world accepted, and it's all written. And not only Ethiopians, but an array of mainly Western historians and writers embellished it to an extent where it became a truth, more or less, like it has started to be taken as some kind of a truth. And to write within that body of literature that's accepted everywhere, and to say, now look, but this is what actually happened, it becomes a very difficult situation. I've always said to younger people, whenever younger people ask me how I felt about writing this story, I always tell them it's like swimming against the tide, you know, a strong tide for that matter. Because whenever, in the 1970s, a bunch of Eritrean intellectuals, writers started to write about Eritrea. And I might, Richard was mentioning some of them. I might add Jordan Gabramadhan and Barakat Habte Selassie and Aubas Johannes, whom I refer a lot in my book because he wrote an extremely important book that I don't find is referred to anywhere. Yasu Gaim, Ruth Eob, Barakat Redi Barakat Ab, Awat Wolde Mikael. People like that have written about Eritrea, but it doesn't catch up. It doesn't. I don't find it quoted in scholarly works because they think it's just Eritreans trying to create or reconstruct history. But what's wrong with reconstructing history if the truth has been buried for a long time? What's wrong with bringing it forward? I don't see. But at the same time, also, you take into consideration what the Ethiopians and the others say about your history, and then you maintain a certain degree of objectivity. You move away from rhetoric and rhetoric and vitriol and that kind of language to a more acceptable, objective writing. That's my preference. That's what I have tried to maintain and attain in this work.
Thank you. Any question here?
Yeah, it's not a question really. It's just if people who want to ask Alemseged, they just have to focus on that book, not like outside the book, please. Because you're leading the stage, Professor, with all due respect. Anyone who's trying to ask outside that book, if you can dismiss that, please. Thank you. So we all can focus on the book.
Okay, we have a question here, and then we're going to go to Guy.
Shall I ask?
Yes.
Well, thank you. It's a privilege to be here. I think, thank you, SOAS, as well, for bringing our legacy history. And I really appreciate what you did. And it's a privilege to be here as well to ask you a question. So back to the history, we are the Eritrean people, the first people to write this. We are the first people to write Tigrinya. We are the first people to write Ge'ez. We are the first people to write Tigrinya in the Horn of Africa. So this is the story. And from there, we are the first people to be Christian in Africa as well. And additionally, story told us about the movement of in 40s, 50s, different kind of parties from different kind of ethnicity, religion. Where do you see this coming in the next generation?
Excuse me?
Where do you see this kind of multi-party in the next generation of Eritrea?
I'm not sure I understand your question. When
I'm reflecting to your book.
yeah,
So you wrote about Rasta Sama, Sultan, all those guys brought the revolution of that. And we had a parliament was led by the Eritrean as well. So where do you see that kind of multi-party coming in Eritrea in the long journey?
That's outside the.
No, I think,
Yeah.
as per the previous suggestion, can we stay focused on the book, please, and go to Guy?
So to touch on the question of whether Eritreans accepted outside rule without any kind of protest or they submitted to it. You have written about this, but you were the only one who wrote in your book, where you say Eritrean scholars begin Eritrean history with Italian colonization, but you trace the history of protests and rebellion before the arrival of the Italians.
This is not about me, Guy. Can you direct the question?
Don't you need to correct Alemseged? I think that view of Eritrean history, I'm not saying you are right or he's wrong, but there is another version of Eritrean history. I don't think all Eritreans submitted to Italian colonialization. I don't think all Eritreans submitted to Italian colonialism. There were some forces that objected to, even protested and fought, rebelled against Italian colonialism. And that voice needs to be heard. And Richard is one of the very few scholars who addresses that question.
that's because you're asking me questions outside this game. Ata game? No, I mean, you're asking me questions outside of this book. This is not the area which you're touching on, because he asked me when does a nation start. I said the majority of the people and their leaders submitted to Italy. They did.
But there were some who rebelled.
Oh, maybe yes, but by and large, I mean, the people, most of the leaders, begin with Hamid of Aurora Habab, or everybody submitted to Italy. But it's an important. It's in my introduction also. So it becomes. It's distracting.
Okay, so in the last few minutes, can I ask people to remain focused on the topic of the book? I have a question over here, and then I'm going to go down, gentleman with the glass. Right.
Thank you. My question is, what was your biggest challenge? What was your biggest challenge writing this book? What gave you the most satisfaction? And what is the underlying message?
My biggest challenge in writing this book?
Challenges? Satisfaction then. What gave you the most satisfaction in researching this book? And also, what is the underlying message that you would want the reader to take away from the book?
I don't know.
Your biggest challenge and your satisfaction.
Greatest satisfaction that you got.
The biggest challenge and the biggest satisfaction. Well, the biggest challenge.
What would you want readers to take away from the book?
Pardon?
what do readers take away from them?
Yeah.
Apart from profits for you, royalties.
The biggest challenge, I think, was finding the right material, getting people to sit down and talk about their experiences. As I said, Eritreans are extremely reluctant to share their views when especially it touches on other people's sensitivities. So it's always been very difficult. For example, as for Mikael, it took me quite a while to convince him to. Then I went with his cousin, his nephew, who was also a fighter. So he told him I was a nice person and so on and so forth. And so he agreed. So one challenge was that. And sometimes also memory escapes a lot of people when they reach the age I've reached. Most of the people I interviewed were about the age I'm in now. And so unfortunately, some of them, for example, the Alemseged Tesfai, I came here to London twice to interview him. And the first time he was okay, but the second time, you know. So that kind of disappointing experience. And then the documentation. Sometimes you find documents too late. One document that, one document that Hamid gave me. In fact, I want to correct one section of my book, page 160, I believe it is, where I say the British, what was it called? British Records Office, Public Records Office, impounded one particular document, and I had no idea why they had impounded it. But this was when I came here in 2002. I couldn't find it, and I asked several people, some people with access to the Foreign Office, in fact, particularly Michaela Rong and Martin Plaut, but you know, they told them, you know, but somehow Hamid found it and sent it to me, and because it had been declassified. So he sent it to me, and the last correction that I made in this book, the last correction that I made in this book was what Hamid sent me, but I didn't realize that it was the same document that in the previous page I had said they had impounded it. So you'll find the answer to the impound to my accusation of the British on the next page. Unfortunately, you know, these kinds of things happen when you write a big book like that, and then you are pressured, and so I'll have to correct it somehow. I don't know how, but now I've started to correct it. So maybe I'll say it every time I have the opportunity to address the public. Satisfaction?
Yeah.
This. I'm finished with the book. I'm talking to people about it. That's satisfaction enough. Thank you.
Okay. We only have a few minutes. I want to get a range of, you've had your hand up for a little while, and then we'll.
I just want to ask two questions. One is,
Make them brief.
is to, about Ibrahim Sultan. I had the privilege of knowing and speaking a lot to Sir Kennedy Travaskis, and most of our talk was about Ibrahim Sultan.
Please. Can you wait, please?
Okay.
She's asking.
I will go, yeah?
Yeah, publisher representative. Sorry, continue.
Sorry.
Yeah, carry on, please.
Most of the time, the talk I had with Ibrahim Sultan, so much so, I have this vision of Ibrahim Sultan. And for me, Ibrahim Sultan had contributed so much to the Eritrean nationhood or to the Eritrea we have. I strongly believe that he hasn't been, how to say, his contribution has not been appropriately recognized. And I really feel strongly about this because, you know, he had the choice. You know, he wasn't only anti-Ethiopia. He didn't want also to be part of Khartoum as a lowlander, as a Muslim. He had that choice, but he didn't. So had he done that, the whole history of Eritrea would have been different.
I don't know. Who are you talking about?
Ibrahim Sultan.
Ibrahim Sultan? So what happened to Ibrahim Sultan? Pardon?
Yeah, he hasn't been properly recognized.
Where? Where?
I'm saying, I had the privilege of meeting Sir Kennedy Travascus, who knew Ibrahim Sultan so much so that I had this vision of Ibrahim Sultan as a super active man who really did everything to have an independent Eritrea. And at that time, he was not only anti-Ethiopia, but he didn't want also to be part of Sudan or whatever, according to where the English plan was. So, and I feel in our history, Ibrahim Sultan's contribution to our history hasn't been appropriately recognized, and I strongly feel this.
Have you read my book?
And secondly, I wanted to ask you how useful was Sir Travasky's unpublished literature useful to your writing books?
Well, first of all, Ibrahim Sultan is, to my knowledge and my experience with this book, properly recognized here. Ibrahim Sultan occupies a lot of the space in this book, and his contribution, the fact that he led the independence movement, the fact that he led the movement against partition of Eritrea is well recognized. His declaration to Travascus, who Travascus had always thought that Ibrahim Sultan would go along with his idea of partition when the Muslim League was created, because Travascus was of the notion, of the opinion that the Muslim League was going to be purely a Muslim organization. Ibrahim Sultan was using it. He was using Islam as a way of bringing Muslims together, but he never lost sight of the importance of working with Christians for the independence of Eritrea. So that is very well recognized, properly recognized. Travascus, what did you say about Travascus?
How useful was it?
Oh, Travascus, yeah, that one that you.
Not many people.
Yes, yeah, but it has been published, of course. It has now been published. I got a hold. You gave me that document, and it has been published now. It's called The Deluge. It's a book now. It's a book. It's available, and I got it. I had a lot of problems with that manuscript because it was not well organized, but somebody organized it and had it published, and it's a very, very useful book that I recommend others to read. That's when Travascus wrote about his final meeting with Ibrahim Sultan. Ibrahim Sultan had kept his ideas secret, his idea of independence secret. And when he established the Muslim League, he asked Travascus permission to launch it in Quran. You know, a big launching ceremony, a big inauguration of the party. So Travascus at that point asked him, but then, you know, what is the aim of your party? He had never told him. And Ibrahim Sultan said, independence. And that's when Travascus says it was as if a bomb had been, or something has exploded, he was shocked. Because all along he had thought that the Muslim League of Eritrea would follow the example of Janus, similar organization in Pakistan, and ask for partition of the Western provinces, but Ibrahim Sultan refused. This is properly documented and properly written there, recognized.
Okay, I'm conscious that we're now running over time, so I'm going to, what's that?
Yeah, so there's 4 questions online, but I'll just say them together and then you'll decide if you have time to read or not. Oh God, okay. So there's Mite Gabrenius, who is praising you a lot and saying that you are the northern light of Eritrean history. They're very happy that you have this book. Congratulations. That's just in short. I'll send you this later. There's Waldo, who says that people should try and work with Alemseged to write even more research. Yeah, I think somebody is saying, Professor Richard Reid, really pleased to have you here.
Oh.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, that's it.
Okay, final question to the gentleman in the glasses here.
Yeah, so partially it is actually answered. I was going to ask about the challenge and the alleged initially last time you told us about the document that was impounded. You finally got it. Can you tell us a little bit about it, or not about the impounded document, but the history about the archives, trying to get the archives, and in a summary, what did it reveal to you? How important was it?
The archives in Eritrea.
No, the British archive.
Yeah.
The British occupation of Eritrea after World War II.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, first of all, the archives in Eritrea are very rich, extremely rich in British documentation, in Ethiopian, some. We had a problem with Ethiopian documents in 1993 or 4 or 5, maybe. I think maybe 19, when our relationships with the TPLF was, with the PRDF was very good. I personally went to the Prime Minister's office and asked one of the assistants there for access to the archives, and he was very nice, and he said yes. So I went back to Asmara and sent a delegate, my colleagues, to do some research there. But when they came actually to the archives themselves, he found out all these documents were there, the provinces, Ilubabor and Bale and all that, and Eritrea was one of them. But all the documents were gone, and they had removed them from there, so we couldn't access them. But then there were some, but we found some in Eritrea. But as far as British and some Ethiopian, Italian, and other documentations are concerned, the RDC is quite rich. I went to Addis Ababa also myself and did some work in the Institute of Ethiopian Studies. Not much, but some work. I had some problems there, but some of my old friends, Ethiopian friends, professors at the university helped me. I came here to the archives. It was then called the Public Records Office in Kew Gardens, and I used a lot of that material there. Friends of mine brought me some UN documents, people who used to work there. Michaela Long gave me many of the documents that she didn't use, or she had used enough for her book. What's it called? I Didn't Do It For You. So a collection of these documents that I still have in my office were very useful in in my work. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Ida, I'm going to hand back to you to round things off.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Before we finish, tell us quickly what was this photo again?
It relates to the subject is something.
So this is for you. It relates to the topic of your discussion.
Well, that's a
Okay.
very sensitive.
Richard, thanks so much for coming. You came all the way on your own. Thank you so much for this. Thank you very much. Thank you a lot today.
Thank you very much.
And those of you who bought books, the books have been sold. You can have them signed afterwards, if that's okay. So you also want a photo with the great author. But let's start with this so that we can put it.
Okay, he's going to make me look bad, but
Okay.
okay.
Thank you.